Hello, it's Paul Driscoll here, aka the Drisk, from the RGDS podcast, the Retro Gaming Discussion Show. And this is me finally finishing off the series of my best game of a letter arcade edition. And this is for the letter Z. We have now reached the last video in the series. We have made it, guys and girls. Congratulations. And I really hope as you've gone through this series and perhaps, rewatch them all now that they're all done and go on a voyage of discovery as I have in discovering all these wonderful arcade games. Now, don't forget, as I mentioned, you can check out my playlist with all these previous letters, and also, please subscribe to the RGDS podcast YouTube channel. We still don't have many people on the channel, but it has got more and more popular. And, we not only put on our podcast with video content of the games we're discussing, so it really elevates, I think, the podcast experience. But we also add, when we can, stacks of additional content that we consider are worth giving a watch. Anyway, on to the series, and this is where I imagine, per letter on a system, if I could only choose 5 games of that letter for that system, in this case the arcades, what would they be? So I'm not coming at it from the most historically important or most beloved games by most people. This is a personal list of what 5 games I would choose today. If all others disappeared, what ones would I want to remain? And then, of course, I'll give all the honourable mentions of the games in the letter that aren't in my top 5, but are definitely worthy of you giving it a try. As I mentioned, this series has always been just a bit of fun. It's really an excuse to highlight some awesome games and to go off the beaten path from all the usual ones that always get trumped out and mentioned. And I really fondly hope, the next time you're looking through your fully loaded emulator device, or next time you're perhaps in Arcade Club or somewhere similar where it has all these wonderful arcade machines available, remember perhaps the game that I shouted out and, give it a try and discover it for yourself. And that's what this, series and this video is all about. Okay, so let's go on to the letter Z. And sure, it is a small letter, but I think there's some absolute bangers here. So sit back and let me take you through my personal top 5 choices for the letter Z. Okay, we begin with our 5th choice, and I've decided to go for Zookeeper, made by Taito and released in 1982. In the game, you play Zeke the zookeeper, and you must quickly run around the zoo animal enclosure to rebuild the wall that is constantly crumbling and allowing the animals to escape. An escaped animal will run around the outside of the wall, and you'll need to jump at the specific times, jump over them, else they'll maul you and eat you. There's things you can pick up like fruit, beer and ice cream, and more importantly there is net power-ups, and that allows you to capture the animals and put them back in the compound. You don't have to jump over them. And at the end of the game, or the end of that level, you gain so many points for the animals kept within the enclosure, and of course, how well you survived. The second screen that it then goes on to is quite a different affair. Your girlfriend Zelda has been tied to a palm tree by the naughty monkey. So you must jump up the moving platforms whilst avoiding the hurling coconuts by the monkey to help free her. It's kind of like a variant of Donkey Kong, and it's good fun. And then it loops back to the first style of game with, of course, greater difficulty. And that's really it for the game. It was made by Keith Egging and John Morgan. Now, John actually went on to Leyland, and he did the fantastic racers Ivan Ironman, Ivan Stewart, Super Off-Road, and Danny Sullivan's Indy Heat. So, went on to great things as well. Overall, I really like this game. It's fast, it's frantic and addictive as hell, and I always keep going back to it for more. A real classic in my eyes. Now, Zookeeper bizarrely never saw a home port back in the day, although it does appear on the Taito Legends compilation that came out in the Xbox PS2 era. Nowadays, the easiest way is to either play on Amp Street, because thankfully it's there, or on MAME. And this is actually one game that is in Arcade Club in Bury, In the UK, that's near Manchester, so you can play the real arcade machine there as well. Okay, let's go on to my fourth choice, and I've gone for the shooter Zero Wing, released by Toplin in 1989. Now, it's not one of Toplin's finest in my opinion, but it must be said that a Toplin average shooter is better than most shooters out there, and with that in mind, I think it's worthy inclusion to the list. I think it offers some really nice level designs and some fantastic music. Now, this started out as an internal training project. It was never supposed to be commercially released by Toplin, but they were using the engine of Hellblade, and they saw that there was something there. So they brought in some of the veterans who'd done Hellfire and Truxton with all these sort of like new recruits that it was a training game on, and they brought it to market. Now, Umera, who all the music, has gone on record saying that he's not a fan of the game. He felt it was cobbled together and it has uneven design. Now, for me though, outside of Toplin, this is a real classic, and I actually prefer it to Hellblade, if I'm honest. I find it more an enjoyable game. Now, of course, it's famous today for that Japanese English phrase of "all your base belong to us." So memorable and lovely, and it's been an internet meme ever since in recent years. But this game does offer so much more than that. It's really good shooter. As I mentioned, the music is amazing by Toplin legends Tatsuya Umera and Masashiro Yuji, and it has some inspired level designs. I mean, the barricade zone, for example, I think is sublime and really well thought out. Now, Zero Wing was ported to the Mega Drive and PC Engine CD, and it really was well received back in the day. They're quite good ports. Today you can pick up the game on the Nintendo Switch or the PC, and of course through MAME emulation, as you see here. Okay, let's go on to my third choice, and I've gone for another shooter, which is Z-Blade, released in 1994 by NMK for the SNK Neo Geo system. This is a great horizontal shooter with wonderful power-ups and interesting level designs, even if it does have that annoying rave music, which is really grates on my ears, and I quite like some rave music. It's known as Operation Ragnarok in Japan. I've obviously gone for the Z-Blade global name, but this is nevertheless a fun blaster with 3 manga style characters, offering you in the ship to have 3 variants of speed, and you do your sort of purchases and upgrades very much like UN Squadron style, so there's that element as well. For me, I love the variety of the game, and it's got some beautifully visual levels to encounter and some great level bosses. And while I'll be the first to say it's not a solid classic, it is a solid blaster in its own right, and it's one that I have a lot of time for. Now, back in the day it only appeared in the arcades, but today it is part of the Neo Geo ACA game library, so that means you can buy the game digitally on Xbox One, Switch, PS4 and PC, so pretty much everywhere. And of course you can play it on MAME, as you see here. Right, let's go on to my second choice, and I've gone for Zero Gunner 2, released in 2001 by Sikio. It's a top-down shooter, but in 3D. But the big standout really is you can change the direction of your helicopter craft independent of where you're moving. So this gives you much more control and really adds to the game, because you can sort of like move one way and shoot to the upper corner of the opposite side. And it's made by Shinsuke Nakamura, who did the Aero Fighter, Samurai Aces and Gunberg games. And like those, this continues the talent, being an amazing shooter, sporting beautiful visuals and thumping sound effects. The sound effects are really good, and it's really one that I keep coming back to again and again. This had an amazing port on the Dreamcast at the time, that's where I first discovered it, but since then it's had ports on the PS4, Xbox One series, Switch and PC. You can also get it as part of the fantastic Sikio Shooting Stars Alpha Pack. I really recommend, if you love your shooters, to get the Sikio Shooting Stars Alpha and Bravo packs on the Switch. They certainly sell them digitally. I think Japan has a trilogy under a slightly different name that you can buy as well for the Switch. So that brings me on to my number one choice for the letter Z. And I have gone for the 1999 Sega classic Zombie Revenge. Now this originally was a spin-off of the game House of the Dead, calling itself in development Blood Bullet, the House of the Dead side story. They then decided to drop the House of the Dead element and call it just simply Zombie Nightmare before hitting on Zombie Revenge, which is the release name. But what we have here is a fun two-player shooter. You run around, shoot everything on the screen. It's not one you have to think that deeply on. And I just always loved it. It's got a great variety of zombies and levels that you encounter. There's always something new. It's a short game because it's an arcade, but it's one that you'll have a blast with for that sort of like half an hour, 40 minutes you're playing through. It also has the wonderful, terrible dialogue and delivery, the voice delivery of those House of the Dead style games. So it always keeps you smiling from ear to ear. Yeah, I mean, that's it really. I mean, it's one blast I always go for. You can have great fun. It does come out, it did come out on the Dreamcast, a pretty solid version. And I think it's the best way to play it because you have the arcade perfect, pretty much, version of the game. But there's also an original extended Dreamcast version. So that's still, today, one of the best ways to play the game. And of course, like emulators, you can upscale the graphics as well. So there you have it. There are my personal top 5 games for the arcades for the letter Z. But I can already hear you screaming at least one big hitter that I missed out on. So let's go through those honourable mentions now. So let's begin with the elephant in the room. It is, of course, Zaxxon, released in 1982 by Sega and Gremlin, and it was Sega developed. This is a game that I think most people know. It was an isometric shooter and a massive hit back in the day, offering unique gameplay with the ability to fly and change your height, so you had to worry about verticality as well as like the enemies on the screen and going left and right. It came on loads of systems back in the day to various porting success. More recently, it was a hidden unlockable on the Sega Mega Drive collection, that fantastic 2007 collection that you could buy. And you can also play it on MAME, as you see here. And I didn't choose this because I've just never got on with the game. I find it quite frustrating. I find it quite clunky. It's not like I don't particularly mind isometric. I mean, I love the Viewpoint, for example, was a wonderful isometric shooter. But I think it's just that added worry about the height, and yeah, it just annoys me as a game. So that's why it didn't make my personal list. But that's not taking anything away from the game itself. But let's have a look at some of the other shooter recommendations for the letter Z. Well, first, of course, we have Zero Gunner, or that should be Zero Gunner, if you're going to be pedantic. It was released in 1997. Of course, it was the first game in the series of the one that I chose in my list, and it's of course done by CPO. And this again had many of the classic team behind Aerofighters, Gunbird, Striker 1945. It's another really polished 1 or 2 player shooter, and like the sequel, you can control and twist your helicopter to shoot independently. Now, bizarrely, this never really got a home port. It only came out in the arcades, and even more bizarrely, it's not on the CKO collection, either Alpha or Bravo. You do have the sequel, but not the original game. I've always found that rather strange. There must be some legal wranglings why they did that. But anyway, let's move on to the next game, and that is another shooter released in 1984, and it's called Zaviga, or Zaviga, and it's released, as I say, 1984 by Data East. Now this is by the numbers shooter really. It's okay. I always have a soft spot for those basic overhead shooters where things are a little less frantic than some of the bullet hells. I'm always sort of drawn to them, and this offers a competent, if not special, shooter, and it's one that I do enjoy, and that's why I wanted to give it a little honourable mention. Better though, in my opinion, is Zector. This is released by Sega in 1982, and it's a fantastic vector alternative to Asteroids. It's one that nobody ever talks about. It really adds a lot more variety in enemies, and you've got ender level bosses. So if you love your style of game such as Asteroids, there's a lot to love here and well worthy of your time. Now, one thing people don't realise actually, in the Sega Mega Drive collection released in 2007, this is a hidden away game, and it's a real classic. It's so difficult to track down otherwise. Of course you can play it in MAME, but it's wonderful that there's a legal way to actually enjoy this game as well. Right, let's go on to another shooter, and it's the little-known 1992 shooter called Zing Zing Zip by Tecmo and developed by Alama. This is a vertical blaster with bold visuals, and whilst not revolutionary, it has an enjoyable blast with the game, and it's one that I do enjoy. It's a really nice visual treat and plays really well. The best way is to play it on MAME today. Then we have the 1986 Data East little gem called Zippy Bug. Now this is known as Nubaranka originally. It's a vertical platform shooter that most will have never heard of. You can only play this on MAME, but it's a really fun little game. Now, talking of unknown shooters, how about Zodiac by Orca and released in 1983? Now, as I mentioned, I have a real soft spot for these older, more basic blasters, and this has a wonderful variety with lots of enemies and the level bosses. It has base landing bonus sections. It really is a worthy game. It's one that I really enjoy, and it's one that most people have never heard of or would have skipped over. Realistically, the only way to play this game is MAME, sadly. Okay, looking to more modern shooter, let's go for Zoids Infinity. This is by Taito, and it's a solid 3D versus style shooter based on those little wind-up robot toys of the 1980s. Now, as a kid, I was never allowed to buy the Transformers that I really wanted. My parents deemed them too expensive for the waste of money. So for my robot fix, I got Zoids, which were like one of the cheap knockoffs. But I always liked it. I always liked the winding them up and watching them walk across the tabletop and putting them together. And there's been a variety of Zoid games over the years, but this is one I would recommend. It had a great port on the PS2. On the PS2 Japanese only release, it's called Zoids Infinity Fusors. And it's the best way to play the game, and of course it's wonderful with emulators. You can actually upscale the game as well. But yeah, it's one that I would recommend because it's obscure gem. Now moving on to beat 'em up games, and the one I would recommend is Zero Team, released in 1993 by Seibu Katsu. Here you can play 4 characters. There's Ace, a martial artist with his flying kicks, Speed, who lives up to the name, Spin, she's the sexy thong bikini wearing babe with a fast hand backslap, and it's one I always play, and you've got Big O. He's slow and powerful numbering, but he's another way of style of playing the game. It's a great beat 'em up. It's not an all-time classic, and it doesn't do anything out the ordinary or revolutionary, but it's definitely one I would recommend. You'll have a lot of fun with this. Now on to the racing genre, and I have gone for the 1993 IREM game Zippy Race. Okay, I know I've cheated with this. It did, in the US it's known as Traverse USA, it's known as Motor Race USA, it's known as Motor Tour. The Zippy Race was kind of like a re-release name that they did in Japan. But I wanted to shout it out again. This is a fun little racer, mixing in overhead and from behind racing sections with great visuals and music. Now, it did see ports on the SG-1000 and NES machines, and today you can play it on Antstream or MAME. Okay, let's move on to platform games, and we begin with the interesting 1986 Bally Midway game Zwakari. This has beautiful cartoon visuals, and you play the wizard, or Zachary Thwacker, who's on a mission to take out the evil wizard who's turned your rather busty princess into a frog. This was the first real game that Brian Collins put his stamp on. I mean, he'd done work for Spy Hunter and Discs of Tron before, but this was the first game where he showed his cartoon talent using that engine that the Bally Midway had of displaying those sort of cartoon visuals. He went on to do, Xenophobe, Rampage, Pigskin, 621 AD, so you'll get a good sense of the type of Midway games he got involved with. Now, like many of those Bally Midway games of this period, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, gameplay-wise it's a little bit clunky, but the cartoon visuals and detailed art really does carry you over with this game, and it's just worth it to see all those little nice touches as you sort of play through. Now, the other platformer is Zzyx. That's ZZY, ZZYXX. My word, that's a mouthful, isn't it? It was released in 1982 by Cinematronics, but Zzyx is a lot of fun, and Spectrum owners probably will know the game kind of by the classic Jumping Jack, because that basically took that idea of this game and sort of ran with it. Like that game, you have to jump your way to the top using the gaps to get to the top of the screen. It's frustrating as hell, but there's something addictive and Moorish that keeps you playing even though you're born out of frustration, just want to get that little bit further. Meanwhile, Zoo Papa, that came out on SNK in 2001, and it's another bubble style platformer, taking many of the ideas of Snow Brothers and probably even more from the SNK classic Nightmare in the Dark. Like those, it's a single screen level type affair. You hurl little creatures that immobilize your enemies, allowing you to sort of catch them and then knock them off the screen. It's a fun little game to enjoy and spend time with. I mean, I think people know I'm not the biggest fan of the SNK bubble style games, but like with those, if you're a fan of those, you'll have a lot of time with this, and this is why I wanted to give it an honourable mention. Right, let's go on to the final genre, and it's puzzles. And our final game, we begin with Zoo. That's ZOOO, released in 2004 by Success. Now, you might recognise this as its homeport Western name of Zookeeper. Came out on the Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, and actually it came out on quite a few of the mobile phone apps of the day. It's that standard flip two objects to make three or more in a row and make them disappear. I mean, it's been done a million times before this and a million times after. I mean, this one is probably the game that Candy Crush probably based itself on a little bit. It certainly has that same concept, and I really like the game. I love the great cute animal designs of the objects that you're matching up, but like with all these sort of games, it's that addictiveness of seeing the combos one after the other. A single move can generate all these combos if you time it right. It's very addictive, and that's why Candy Crush went on to be such a global phenomenon. Anyway, so there you go. That was the last letter in the series of the best games to try. This was for the letter Z. I really hope that you perhaps go back and watch the entire playlist of games. I'll put it in the show notes, and I think it's a wonderful experience. Really, it's a good voyage of discovery as a collective whole of cutting through the fat and chaff of many of the arcade games to give people an idea of what to play. That was always its purpose. Now, don't forget, please subscribe to the RGDS video channel. We do regular content on there for our podcast, elevating it even more, I think. Although we're predominantly an audio podcast, we add our video game footage of the actual games being played alongside with the audio, so you really get a sense of those games, and I think it elevates the podcast to its best form. Likewise, there's loads of other things that we do, and look out. I mean, recently I've produced producing 2 Amiga books. These are, I think, the most comprehensive books on the Amiga system for games, at least. It's called the RGDS Top 50 Amiga Games, and it's soon to release in a month or two, so subscribe to know when that comes out. It is a free book. I have added like a buy me a coffee if people want. I mean, I've done it because, to be honest, I was made redundant, sadly. So suddenly money is a lot stringent than when I started the book. But it is a wonderful book, and it's one that you can sort of like pick up and enjoy. I can't wait to share it with everybody, and we will do an accompanying double podcast based on the book of the 50 games that we've chosen. So please look out for that as well. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the series as much as I enjoyed putting it together. And like me, there were many classic arcade games that you perhaps weren't aware of and discovered in this voyage of discovery of playing these fantastic games. So, like always, let me know what you would have chosen for your top 5 for the letter Z, and and also actually give some of your favourite arcade games, and let me know any that are perhaps new to you and discovery of the whole series. I'd love to hear. Anyway, don't be a stranger, and until next time, keep it retro.